The blood on Katherine Brennan's dress was not her own, but everyone in Socorro, New Mexico, believed she had put it there herself in some mad fit of violence. It was October 1878, and the autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets as she stood outside the general store, watching the townspeople cross to the other side of the road when they saw her coming. Her husband, Marcus Brennan, had done his work well. For 6 months now, he had been planting seeds of doubt about her sanity in every ear that would listen, and the good people of Socorro had taken root to his lies like desert flowers after rain. Katherine gripped her market basket tighter, her knuckles white beneath her sun-browned skin. She was 24 years old, and she could feel her life slipping away like sand through her fingers. Marcus controlled everything now. Her money, her property that she had inherited from her father, even her reputation. When she tried to tell people the truth about him, about his drinking and his gambling and the debts he had accumulated, they looked at her with pity and fear. "Poor mad Katherine," they whispered. "Poor delusional woman who cannot see how patient her husband is with her affliction." The worst part was not knowing who to trust anymore. Every kind word felt like a trap. Every sympathetic glance seemed to hide judgment. She had stopped going to church 3 weeks ago when Reverend Thompson had taken Marcus aside after the service and told him, loud enough for Katherine to hear, that there were facilities back east for women with her condition. Marcus had smiled that cold smile of his and said he was considering all options for her well-being. Katherine knew what those facilities were. Asylums. Once a woman went in, she rarely came out, and if she did, she was truly broken then. She was contemplating this dark future when she heard the horse. Not just any horse, but the kind of powerful, well-trained animal that spoke of a rider who knew what he was doing. Katherine looked up from under the brim of her bonnet and saw him for the first time. He was tall, lean in the way men got when they spent more time in the saddle than out of it. His hat was pushed back just enough that she could see dark hair and eyes that were a startling shade of gray. He dismounted in one fluid motion and tied his horse to the rail outside the saloon. Then he did something that made Katherine's breath catch. He looked directly at her and tipped his hat, respectful and unhurried, as if she were a lady deserving of courtesy rather than a madwoman to be avoided. She dropped her gaze quickly, afraid of what this small kindness might cost her if Marcus found out. But when she glanced back up, the stranger was still watching her, and there was something in his expression that was not pity or fear. It was curiosity. His name was Fletcher Payne, and he had come to Socorro tracking a man who owed money to a ranch owner up in Colorado. Fletcher was not a bounty hunter exactly, though he had done that work before. Mostly he hired out his gun and his skills to people who needed problems solved, and he was good at what he did. He was 30 years old and had spent the last dozen years drifting from town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots. It was a lonely life, but it was honest work, and Fletcher prided himself on his honesty. The man he was looking for was not in Socorro, as it turned out. Fletcher discovered this after 2 days of asking questions and checking the surrounding ranches. He should have moved on then, should have headed north toward Albuquerque where his quarry had apparently gone. But he did not leave. He told himself it was because his horse needed rest, or because he wanted to stock up on supplies, or because the food at the boarding house was better than usual. But the truth, which Fletcher was slowly admitting to himself, was that he wanted to know more about the woman with the haunted eyes who everyone seemed to avoid. He heard the stories, of course. In a town the size of Socorro, gossip spread faster than wildfire. The shopkeeper told him about Katherine Brennan while measuring out coffee beans. The woman had episodes, he said quietly, looking around to make sure no one else heard. violent episodes where she said terrible things and made accusations against her poor husband. Marcus Brennan was a saint for putting up with it. Everyone agreed. But Fletcher had spent enough years reading people to know when something did not sit right. And nothing about this story sat right with him. He first spoke to Katherine on his third day in town. She was at the well in the town square, drawing water in the early morning before most people were about. Fletcher approached slowly, making sure his footsteps were loud enough that he would not startle her. "Morning, madam," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I was wondering if you might help me with something." Katherine turned, and up close, Fletcher could see the exhaustion in her face. She was pretty, he realized, or would be if fear had not carved itself into every line of her expression. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her dress was plain and mended in several places. But her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they assessed him with the wariness of a wild animal. "I cannot help you with anything," she said quietly. "You should ask someone else." "I am looking for information about the land north of here," Fletcher continued, as if she had not spoken. "I heard your father used to own property in that direction before he passed. I thought you might know the territory. It was a gamble, bringing up her father." Fletcher had learned from the boarding house owner that Katherine's father had been a respected rancher before his death 3 years ago, and that Katherine had inherited everything. He had also learned that somehow, despite the inheritance laws that should have protected her property, Marcus Brennan now controlled it all. Something flickered in Katherine's eyes. "My father's land is not mine to discuss any more," she said, and there was bitterness in her voice that cut through her careful neutrality. "That seems a shame," Fletcher said. "From what I hear, you grew up on that land. You would know it better than anyone." "What I know does not matter to anyone in this town," Katherine said, and Fletcher heard the exhaustion beneath the words. "You should go ask my husband. He will tell you whatever you need to know. He tells everyone everything these days." She picked up her water bucket, and Fletcher could see her hands trembling slightly. He wanted to say something more, wanted to push past her walls, but he also knew when to retreat. Instead, he simply tipped his hat again and stepped aside to let her pass. "For what it is worth, madam," he said as she walked by, "you do not seem insane to me." Katherine stopped walking. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, her back to him. Then, without turning around, she said, "You do not know me, Mr. Payne." "No, madam, I do not," Fletcher agreed. "But I know liars and I know scared people, and I know the difference." She did turn then, and the look she gave him was so full of desperate hope and terror that Fletcher felt something shift in his chest. "You do not know my husband," she whispered. "You do not know what he is capable of." "Then tell me," Fletcher said. But Katherine was already hurrying away, the water bucket swinging in her grip, and Fletcher was left standing alone by the well, wondering what exactly he had just stumbled into. He started paying attention after that. Real attention, the kind he usually reserved for tracking fugitives or reading a dangerous situation. And the more he watched, the more he saw. He saw how Marcus Brennan held court at the saloon every evening, buying drinks and telling stories. How he played the part of the beleaguered husband with practiced ease. How he dropped little comments about Katherine's behavior, always with a sad shake of his head. Just yesterday she insisted the food was poisoned, Marcus would say. Or, "I found her talking to herself again in the kitchen." She thought I was an intruder. Fletcher also saw how Marcus watched Katherine when he thought no one was looking. There was no love in that gaze, no concern. There was only cold calculation and something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Fletcher had seen a lot of evil in his 30 years, but there was something particularly vicious about this kind. The kind that destroyed a person's credibility so thoroughly that even if they told the truth, no one would believe them. It was murder by reputation, and it was working. On his 5th day in Socorro, Fletcher watched Marcus grab Catherine's arm outside the church and yank her close when she tried to walk past him. From a distance, it might have looked like a husband steadying his wife. But Fletcher saw the force of it, saw Catherine's wince of pain, and saw the smile on Marcus's face as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear that made her go pale. That evening, Fletcher went to the saloon. He waited until Marcus was well into his cups, loosened up by whiskey and the admiration of the men around him, and then Fletcher joined the group. "Marcus Brennan," he asked, extending his hand. "Fletcher Payne, I have been hearing about your situation with your wife. That must be difficult." Marcus's eyes were slightly unfocused, but he straightened up at this attention. "You heard about that, did you? Well, I appreciate the sympathy, friend. It is a heavy burden, but Katherine is my wife. I made vows." "Very admirable," Fletcher said smoothly. "Tell me, how long has she been having these episodes?" And Marcus, drunk and eager for sympathy, started talking. Fletcher listened, filing away details, noting inconsistencies. The stories changed slightly each time Marcus told them. The timeline did not quite add up. And most telling of all, when Fletcher asked about specific instances, Marcus got defensive and changed the subject. "You ask a lot of questions," Marcus said finally, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Fletcher shrugged. "Just interested. I knew a man once whose wife had similar troubles. It ended badly. I hoped maybe your situation was different." "How did it end?" Marcus asked, leaning forward. "He had her committed," Fletcher said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "She died there about 6 months later. Pneumonia, they said, but my friend, he always felt guilty about it. Wondered if maybe he had been too hasty, if maybe she was not as sick as people said." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Irritation, Fletcher thought, and impatience. "Well, I am not hasty," Marcus said, but his voice had a sharp edge now. "I have been very patient with Katherine. But a man can only take so much." Fletcher nodded sympathetically and bought another round of drinks. By the time he left the saloon, he was absolutely certain of one thing. Katherine Brennan was not insane, but her husband was dangerous. The question was what to do about it. Fletcher was a practical man. He understood that believing Katherine and being able to help her were two different things. He had no proof of anything except his own instincts. He was a stranger in this town, and Marcus was well liked and established. If Fletcher made accusations without evidence, he would be run out of Socorro within a day, and Katherine would be worse off than before. He needed to be smart about this. Strategic. The opportunity came 2 days later when Fletcher saw Katherine heading out of town on foot, carrying a basket. It was late afternoon, and she was moving quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being followed. Fletcher waited until she was well clear of the town limits, then mounted his horse and followed at a distance. She led him to a small homestead about 3 miles outside Socorro. The house was run down but not abandoned, with a thin stream of smoke rising from the chimney. Fletcher watched as Katherine knocked on the door and was led inside by an elderly Mexican woman. He waited, keeping his horse behind a cluster of rocks where he would not be easily seen. Half an hour later, Katherine emerged, but her basket was empty now. She spoke with the woman for a few minutes more, then started the walk back toward town. Fletcher made his decision. He rode to the homestead and dismounted, approaching the door with his hat in his hands. The woman who answered was small and ancient, with eyes that missed nothing. "See," she asked warily. "Forgive the intrusion, madam," Fletcher said in his rough Spanish. "I am a friend. I want to help the young woman who was just here, Katherine Brennan." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You are not her friend. I do not know you." "You are right," Fletcher admitted. "But I want to be her friend. I want to help her, please. I know her husband is lying about her." For a long moment the old woman studied him, then she opened the door wider. "Come in, then." "But if you mean harm, my son has a rifle and he is a very good shot." Inside, the house was simple but clean. The woman introduced herself as Maria Gutierrez. Her son, she explained, had worked for Catherine's father years ago. When the father died and Marcus took over, the son had been forced off the land, but Catherine had never forgotten the family. She brought them food and money whenever she could manage it without Marcus knowing. "She is a good woman," Maria said fiercely. "That husband of hers is the devil. He wants her land, and he wants her gone. He tells everyone she is mad so that when he puts her away, no one will question it." "Why does he want her gone?" Fletcher asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Because as long as she lives and is of sound mind, the land is hers by right," Maria explained. "Her father made sure of that in his will. But if she is declared insane and committed, Marcus can have her declared incompetent. Then everything truly becomes his." Fletcher felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. "Has he hurt her?" Maria's face went grim. "Not where people can see. He is too clever for that. But I see the bruises on her arms when she rolls up her sleeves. I see the fear in her eyes. And I know that time is running out. He is growing impatient. He will make his move soon." "Then I need to move first," Fletcher said. "But I need her trust. I need her to talk to me, to tell me the truth about what has been happening." "Can you help with that?" Maria studied him for a long moment. "Why do you care about this?" she asked. "You are a stranger here. This is not your problem." It was a fair question. Fletcher thought about it, about the real answer beneath the surface. "I spent a lot of years minding my own business," he said finally, "walking away from things that were not my concern. But I have seen what happens when good people do nothing, and I cannot walk away from this. I will not." Something in his words must have convinced Maria, because she nodded slowly. "She will be here again in 3 days. Come then. I will tell her you want to help. But after that, it is up to her to trust you." Fletcher thanked her and rode back to Socorro as the sun was setting. He felt something he had not felt in a long time: purpose. This was more than a job now. This was personal. The next 2 days dragged by. Fletcher forced himself to maintain his cover, asking around about land prices, and acting like a man considering settling in the area. He avoided Catherine in public, not wanting to draw Marcus's attention or suspicion. But at night, lying awake in his room at the boarding house, he found himself thinking about her. About the intelligence in her eyes, the strength it must take to endure what she was enduring, the courage required to keep fighting when everyone around her said she was mad. He admired her. And more than that, he was drawn to her in a way that had nothing to do with chivalry or justice. There was something about Katherine Brennan that called to something deep inside him, some lonely part he had kept locked away for years. On the 3rd day, Fletcher rode out to Maria's homestead in the late afternoon. Catherine was already there when he arrived. She stood quickly when he entered, her face pale and wary. "What is this?" she asked Maria, but her eyes were on Fletcher. "What is he doing here?" "He wants to help you, Mija," Maria said gently, "and I think you should listen to him." "I do not need help," Catherine said, but her voice shook. "I do not need anything from anyone." "Yes, you do," Fletcher said quietly, "and you know it. Your husband is setting you up to be committed. He has been poisoning everyone in town against you for months, and unless something changes, he is going to win." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. "What do you care?" she demanded. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Fletcher said. "I know you have been bringing food and money to Maria's family. I know you have been trying to hold on to your dignity and your sanity while your husband systematically destroys your reputation. I know you are stronger than anyone gives you credit for, and I know I do not believe him." Those last words hung in the air between them. Katherine stared at Fletcher, and he could see the war playing out across her face, hope battling against fear, the desperate need to trust someone warring with the knowledge of what trust had already cost her. "Why?" she whispered finally. "Why do you not believe him?" "Because I have spent my whole life learning to read people," Fletcher said. "It is how I have stayed alive, and your husband is a liar. Not a very good one once you know what to look for, but he has had the advantage because no one was looking closely. No one wanted to see the truth." "And you do?" Katherine asked. "I do," Fletcher said simply. Katherine sank back down into her chair. For a long moment she was silent, her hands twisted in her lap. Then slowly she started talking. And once she began, the words poured out like water from a broken dam. She told him everything. How Marcus had courted her after her father's death, how charming and attentive he had been, how she had been grieving and lonely and had not seen through his performance until after they were married, how he had changed almost immediately, becoming cold and controlling, how he drank and gambled away money they did not have, and when she tried to stop him, he hit her for the first time. She told Fletcher about the lies Marcus had started spreading 6 months ago when she threatened to leave him. How he told people she had been acting strange, saying things that were not true, having violent outbursts. How he made sure there were always witnesses to her supposed madness, staging arguments in public where he appeared calm and she appeared hysterical. How he had convinced the doctor in town that Katherine was suffering from female hysteria and needed to be watched carefully. "He is building a case," Katherine said, her voice hollow. "I can see it happening. Every lie, every false witness, every sympathetic look from the townspeople. He is making it so that when he finally has me committed, everyone will nod and say it was inevitable. And then the land will be his, and I will be locked away somewhere, and no one will ever believe me again." Fletcher listened to all of it, his jaw tight with anger. When she finished, he leaned forward and looked her directly in the eyes. "I will not let that happen," he said. "How can you stop it?" Katherine asked, and there was such hopelessness in her voice that Fletcher wanted to promise her the moon and stars if it would bring light back to her eyes. "I do not know yet," he admitted, "but I am good at solving problems and I am very good at being stubborn. We will figure something out, together." "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Katherine asked. "If Marcus finds out you are helping me, he will come after you too. He has friends." "Dangerous friends." Fletcher smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Let him try. I have dealt with dangerous men before." Something shifted in Katherine's expression then. The walls did not come down completely, but Fletcher could see cracks forming. Could see the first fragile shoots of trust beginning to take root. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Over the next hour they made a plan. Fletcher would start gathering evidence, real evidence of Marcus's character and his lies. He would talk to people, ask questions, find the inconsistencies in Marcus's story. Katherine would keep doing what she had been doing, playing the part of the dutiful wife, but she would also start documenting everything. Every lie Marcus told, every time he hurt her, every witness to his cruelty. They would build their own case, one that could stand up against Marcus's lies. It was a long shot. They both knew it. But it was something, and something was more than Katherine had had before. As Fletcher prepared to leave, Katherine caught his arm. "Mr. Payne," she said softly, "thank you for believing me. You cannot know what that means." Fletcher looked down at her hand on his arm, at the fading bruises he could now see on her wrist, and felt that shift in his chest again. "Call me Fletcher," he said. "And you are welcome, Katherine." Her name felt right in his mouth, like something he was meant to say. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Fletcher's life. By day, he played the role of a man considering settling in Socorro, making friends and asking innocent questions. By night, he compiled information. He tracked down people who had worked for Catherine's father, who remembered her before Marcus came along. He found a former business partner of Marcus's who had been cheated and was willing to talk about Marcus's gambling debts and dishonest dealings. He discovered that the blood on Catherine's dress, the incident that had sealed her reputation as unstable, had actually been from a ranch hand who had cut himself badly. Katherine had been helping him, but Marcus had spun the story to make it seem like she had attacked the man in a rage. The ranch hand, it turned out, had left town shortly after, paid off by Marcus to keep quiet. But Fletcher tracked him down in a nearby settlement, and after some persuasion and the promise of money, the man agreed to write out a statement of what had really happened. Fletcher met with Katherine twice more at Maria's homestead. Each time he brought her what he had learned, and each time he saw more of the weight lift from her shoulders. She smiled more, laughed occasionally at his dry observations about the townspeople, began to look less like a hunted animal and more like the woman she must have been before Marcus Brennan came into her life. And Fletcher, despite his better judgment, found himself falling in love with her. It was not something he had planned or wanted. Love was a complication he could not afford, especially not now when everything needed to be handled carefully. But he could not help it, could not stop the way his heart lifted when he saw her, or the fierce protectiveness that surged through him whenever he thought about what she had endured. Could not deny the warmth he felt when she trusted him with her fears and her hopes. He thought she might feel something too. He caught her watching him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read, saw the way her eyes softened when he made her laugh, noticed how she had started touching his hand or his arm when they spoke, small gestures of connection that felt monumental, but neither of them spoke of it. There were more important things to focus on. Marcus was growing increasingly agitated, Fletcher learned. His debts were mounting, and his creditors were becoming less patient. He needed Catherine's land liquidated soon, which meant he needed Katherine gone. The crisis came on a cold November evening. Fletcher was at the saloon when Marcus burst in, his face flushed with drink and anger. He gathered a group of men around him and announced that Katherine had finally gone too far. She had attacked him, he said, with a kitchen knife. He had disarmed her, but she was raving now, completely unhinged. He was done being patient. Tomorrow he was taking her to the doctor and having her committed. It was time. Fletcher's blood ran cold. This was it, the move they had been expecting but hoping would not come so soon. He forced himself to stay calm, to nod sympathetically with the other men, but inside he was calculating. They had evidence now, but was it enough? Could they counter Marcus's claims and the momentum of months of lies? He had to try. Fletcher left the saloon and went directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Garrett was a decent man, Fletcher had learned, but one who avoided conflict when possible. He had accepted Marcus's version of events because it was easier than questioning a respected member of the community. But Fletcher had spent weeks building credibility in Socorro. He had been careful, strategic, and now he needed that investment to pay off. "Sheriff," Fletcher said, entering the office, "I need to talk to you about Katherine Brennan." Garrett looked up from his desk with a sigh. "If this is about Marcus planning to have her committed, I already know. Sad situation, but probably for the best." "What if I told you it was not a sad situation?" Fletcher said. "What if I told you it was a crime?" That got the sheriff's attention. Fletcher sat down and laid out everything he had learned. The evidence of Marcus's lies, the statements from witnesses who told a different story, the documentation of his gambling debts and his motive for wanting Katherine gone. Fletcher spoke calmly and methodically, presenting facts rather than emotions, and he saw Garrett's expression shift from dismissive to interested to troubled. "This is serious," Garrett said when Fletcher finished. "If what you are saying is true, Marcus Brennan has been committing fraud and abuse. But why should I believe you over him? You are a stranger here, Payne. He is an established citizen." "Then come with me and hear it from Katherine herself," Fletcher said. "Listen to her story without Marcus there to control the narrative. Look at the evidence I have gathered. And then decide for yourself who is telling the truth." Garrett hesitated, and Fletcher could see him weighing his options. Finally, the sheriff stood up. "All right," he said. "Let us go talk to Mrs. Brennan. But if this turns out to be nothing, Payne, you and I are going to have a problem." "Understood," Fletcher said. They rode to the Brennan house together. Marcus was not there, still at the saloon working himself into righteous fury, and Katherine answered the door with fear in her eyes that turned to shock when she saw Fletcher with the sheriff. "Mrs. Brennan," Garrett said politely, "may we come in? I would like to ask you some questions." Katherine looked at Fletcher and he nodded slightly. "Trust me," he tried to convey with his eyes. "This is the moment." They sat in the small parlor, and Garrett asked Katherine to tell him, in her own words, what had happened that evening. Katherine's hands shook as she spoke, but her voice was steady. She described how Marcus had come home drunk and angry about money, how he had accused her of hiding funds from him, even though he had taken control of all her finances months ago, how when she tried to defend herself, he had grabbed her and shoved her against the wall. She had picked up the knife from where she had been preparing dinner, not to attack him, but to defend herself. And Marcus had laughed and told her that this was perfect, exactly what he needed. Then he had left to gather witnesses to her madness. As she spoke, Katherine pushed up her sleeves without being asked, showing the fresh bruises on her arms. She showed the sheriff her father's will, which clearly stated that the land was hers. She showed him the ledgers she had been secretly keeping, documenting Marcus's spending and debts. Garrett listened to all of it, his expression growing graver with each revelation. When Katherine finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. "Mrs. Brennan," he said quietly, "why did you not come to me with this before? Who would have believed me?" Katherine asked, and there was a world of pain in those words. "My husband spent months making sure no one would believe me. I had no proof, no allies, nothing but my word against his, and everyone loved him. Everyone pitied him for being married to the madwoman." Garrett looked uncomfortable, and well he should, Fletcher thought. The sheriff had been one of those people who had accepted Marcus's lies without question. "I believe you now," Garrett said finally, "and I will make sure justice is done." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Garrett returned to town and arrested Marcus Brennan on charges of fraud, assault, and attempted conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Marcus, drunk and overconfident, tried to bluster his way out of it, but when confronted with the evidence Fletcher had gathered and Katherine's testimony, his lies fell apart spectacularly. Some of the townspeople who had witnessed his breakdown started remembering inconsistencies in his stories, little things that had not made sense at the time but that they had dismissed. The truth, once revealed, spread through Socorro almost as fast as the lies had. And people who had shunned Katherine now felt ashamed of how easily they had been manipulated. Fletcher watched it all unfold with satisfaction, but his real attention was on Katherine. She stood in the sheriff's office, straight-backed and dignified, as Marcus was led away in chains. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like liberation. When it was over, when the statements had been given, and Marcus was locked in a cell awaiting trial, Fletcher walked Katherine back to her house. They moved slowly through the dark streets, neither of them in a hurry to end this moment. "What will you do now?" Fletcher asked as they reached her door. Katherine turned to look at him, and in the moonlight she was beautiful. "I will reclaim my life," she said. "My land, my reputation, my future. All the things Marcus tried to take from me." "That sounds like a good plan," Fletcher said. "What about you?" Katherine asked. "Will you leave Socorro now, go back to tracking outlaws and solving other people's problems?" Fletcher had been asking himself the same question for days now. The smart thing would be to leave, to move on as he always did. He had done what he came to do, more than he had come to do. There was nothing keeping him here, except there was. "I was thinking I might stay a while," Fletcher said carefully. "If that would be all right with you." Katherine's expression softened. "Why would you stay?" Fletcher took a breath. This was not his way, wearing his heart on his sleeve. But Katherine deserved honesty. She deserved everything. "Because I am tired of drifting," he said. "Because I have spent 12 years running from anything that might tie me down, and I am starting to think I was running from the wrong things. Because when I look at you, I see something I did not know I was looking for. And because I think maybe, if you felt the same way, we could build something good together." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were not sad tears. "I do feel the same way," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to hope for anything, but Fletcher, you make me hope. You make me believe that there might be happiness on the other side of all this pain." Fletcher reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. "There will be happiness," he promised. "I will spend every day making sure of it." She leaned into his touch, and then she was in his arms, and Fletcher was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. To him, she absolutely was. Their first kiss happened there on her doorstep under the November stars, and it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was the kiss of two people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for the chance to be together, and who were not going to waste a single moment of the future they had won. The trial of Marcus Brennan took place 3 weeks later. With the evidence Fletcher had gathered and Katherine's testimony, the verdict was never in doubt. Marcus was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The judge also dissolved the marriage and restored all of Katherine's property and rights to her. Katherine stood in the courtroom and heard the verdict with her head held high. Fletcher stood beside her, his hand resting supportively on the small of her back, and when it was over, they walked out into the winter sunshine together. The people of Socorro had learned their lesson about rushing to judgment. One by one, townspeople approached Katherine to apologize, to express their shame at how they had treated her. Katherine accepted their apologies with grace, though Fletcher could see the hurt that still lingered beneath her forgiveness. Trust, once broken, was not easy to restore, but some relationships healed more easily than others. Maria and her family became regular visitors at Katherine's house. The ranch hands who had worked for her father and remembered her fondly came back to work the land. And the sheriff, chastened by how close he had come to participating in a terrible injustice, became a steadfast ally. As for Fletcher and Katherine, they took their time. There was no rush now, no crisis forcing their hands. They courted properly, with picnics and long rides across her land and quiet evenings on her porch. Fletcher moved into the boarding house temporarily, wanting to give Katherine space to heal and to discover who she was without a man controlling her. But they were together every day, and Fletcher fell more in love with her with each passing week. He loved her strength and her kindness. He loved the way she laughed, free and unguarded now that fear no longer ruled her life. He loved her intelligence and her determination to rebuild everything Marcus had tried to destroy, and Katherine loved him right back. She loved his steadiness, the way he never tried to control or diminish her. She loved his dry humor and his quiet competence. She loved how he made her feel safe but never weak, protected but never helpless. By the time spring arrived in 1879, they both knew what came next. Fletcher proposed on a warm April evening. He had spent the day helping Catherine's ranch hands with the spring branding, and he was covered in dust and smelled like cattle. Not exactly romantic, but Katherine had laughed when he showed up at her door, and that laugh had given him courage. They walked to the spot where her father was buried, a small fenced plot on a hill overlooking the ranch. Fletcher had learned that Katherine came here often to talk to her father, to tell him about her life and ask his advice. It seemed right to do this here. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," Fletcher said as they stood looking out over the land gilded by sunset. "He was the best man I knew," Katherine said, "until I met you." Fletcher turned to her, his heart pounding. "Katherine, I know we have not been courting long. And I know you have every reason to be cautious about trusting a man again. But I love you. I have loved you since the day I first saw you standing outside that general store, trying so hard to be brave. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be that scared again." He pulled a ring from his pocket. It was not fancy, just a simple gold band with a small stone, but he had chosen it carefully. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Will you let me be your partner and your friend and your husband if you will have me?" Katherine looked at the ring and then at Fletcher, and her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Fletcher Payne, and I want to build a life with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her as the sun set over the land that would become theirs together. It was a kiss that promised everything: partnership, passion, respect, and love. All the things Katherine had been denied, and all the things Fletcher had spent years running from because he had not known how precious they could be. They married in June of 1879 in a simple ceremony at the Socorro church. The town turned out to celebrate, and if there was still some lingering guilt in people's eyes when they looked at Katherine, there was also genuine happiness. She and Fletcher had become a beloved fixture in Socorro, respected for their integrity and their dedication to the community. Fletcher settled into ranch life with surprising ease. He had skills from his years of drifting that served him well, and he brought a good head for business to help Katherine expand her father's legacy. Together, they turned the ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. But more than the success, more than the respect they earned, what mattered was the life they built together. It was not always easy. Katherine had nightmares sometimes, waking in the darkness convinced that Marcus had escaped and was coming for her. Fletcher learned to hold her through those nights, to whisper reassurances until she believed them. And Fletcher, so used to being alone, had to learn to let Katherine in, to share his fears and doubts instead of carrying them in silence. They worked through it together. They learned each other's wounds and helped each other heal. And gradually, the shadows of the past faded, leaving room for joy. Their first child, a son, was born in the spring of 1880. They named him James, after Katherine's father, and Fletcher discovered that his heart, which he had thought was full, could expand even further. He held his son with hands that had once dealt in violence and felt those hands transformed by tenderness. Katherine watched her husband cradle their baby and felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark months when Marcus had been systematically destroying her life. She had dreamed of safety, of love, of family. And now she had it all, more abundantly than she had ever imagined possible. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter named Emma and another son named Henry. The house that had once echoed with Catherine's lonely footsteps now rang with laughter and the chaos of children. Fletcher taught his sons to ride and rope and read the land. Katherine taught her daughter to be strong and never to let anyone make her feel small. And together, they taught all three children about integrity, about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult, about believing people when they said they needed help. The years flowed by like water. Fletcher's hair started to gray at the temples. Katherine got small lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun and from smiling so much. Their children grew tall and capable, ready to take over the ranch someday. Socorro changed too. The wild days of the frontier gradually gave way to something more settled. But Fletcher and Katherine remained constants, pillars of the community, the couple whose love story had started with scandal and fear, and transformed into something beautiful. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Fletcher and Katherine rode out to the spot where he had proposed. Their children were grown now, James helping run the ranch, Emma married to a good man from Albuquerque, Henry away at school studying law. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked as they sat on the hill watching the sunset, just as they had 2 decades before. "Staying here, giving up the freedom you had." Fletcher looked at his wife, at the silver threading through her dark hair and the strength still evident in every line of her body. He thought about the life they had built together, about their children and their ranch and the quiet satisfaction of waking up every morning next to someone he loved. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are my freedom, Katherine. You always have been." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned gold and crimson. They had survived so much together. Marcus's cruelty, the town's judgment, the difficulties of building a life from scratch, and they had done more than survive. They had thrived. "I am glad you did not believe him," Katherine said softly, echoing those words Fletcher had spoken so long ago. "I will always believe you," Fletcher promised, kissing the top of her head, "until the end of time." And as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, they had made their home. Fletcher Payne and Katherine Brennan Payne sat together. 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and had chosen to walk toward the light together. Their love story had started with lies and fear, but it had become something true and lasting. Something that would endure long after they were gone, in the land they had nurtured, in the children they had raised, and in the example they had set for everyone who knew them. They had proved that love could survive anything when it was built on trust, respect, and unwavering faith in each other. And that was a legacy worth more than all the land in the territory. The end.